Top security officials from the world's emerging powers are gathered in the Indian capital for the two-day BRICS Security Summit. The meeting taking place against a continued crisis in the Middle East and war in Ukraine. Diplomatic and security officials also expected to talk, quote, non-traditional warfare. That would include terrorism, cybersecurity, and as well as how best to address artificial intelligence. The New Delhi gathering sets the stage for the BRICS summit in September, which both the Chinese and Russian presidents are expected to attend. BRICS brings together 11 emerging economies representing more than 49% of the global population, nearly 40% of the world's GDP, and more than a quarter of global trade. And more Neha Poonia is tracking developments for CNA live from New Delhi. Neha, of course, we're looking ahead to that leader summit, but at this meeting today in New Delhi, China's foreign minister ducking out of the foreign ministers' meeting last month, but attending this one for national security advisors.
Absolutely. And, that time he couldn't be here because of Donald Trump's visit to Beijing and his meetings with his Indian counterpart slated to take place later on Monday evening. Will be closely watched to see what sort of outcomes are announced by both sides, given as this is happening at a time when India and China have been trying to reset ties. But, this meeting is taking place at a time when much of the world's focus has been on the talks in Switzerland, and as such, experts have been speaking to say that even at the National Security Advisors meeting, the main day of events is on Tuesday. The focus will be on how that conflict in Iran has had an outsized impact on the economies of the global south. And there will be hopes that there will be more clarity from the Iranian side on how talks are going. We saw how India's National Security Advisor, Ajit Doval, met with Iran's representative, the Deputy Secretary for the Defense Department. He's here representing Tehran. And New Delhi says both sides have discussed the conflict in Iran as well as the gamut of bilateral ties. We also know that Wang Yi has met with the Iranian representative here in New Delhi at the sidelines of the NSA meeting as well. And China says it's welcomed the discussions that have been held over the weekend. It's offered to continue to offer any kind of assistance that Tehran may need to try and uphold the peace in the region, saying that it's critical now for both sides to maintain the ceasefire, to ensure there's lasting peace, to ensure that this 60-day window is not compromised. And also, once again, Beijing has reiterated support for Tehran, saying that it supports its sovereignty and its right to defend itself, which is, of course, a jab at the US, and also saying once again that it's ready to play a constructive role in bringing about that lasting peace.
So, Neha, of course, plenty to talk about in terms of traditional warfare, but even so, the BRICS meeting also looking, as we just mentioned, at non-traditional warfare.
That's absolutely right, and many experts have been speaking to say that this has been done for a reason, because we saw what happened at the BRICS foreign ministers meeting last month. Much of that was overtaken by the fact that Iran and UAE are both members of this bloc, and both sides hold polar opposite positions on the conflict and how they've been impacted. And, there was a lot of wrangling about whether or not there would be that joint statement. Eventually, it wasn't issued. India issued a chair statement talking about the divisions within the bloc. So to try and avoid that situation, India has identified a theme where it talks about the need to address non-traditional security challenges, to go beyond military conflicts, particularly ones that are impacting member nations. And the focus as such on Tuesday is going to be on cyber intrusions, on digital espionage, misinformation campaigns, terrorist networks and weaknesses in critical infrastructure, New Delhi says. Cross-border terrorism, that's a huge focus for New Delhi, given that it's, repeatedly over the years accused Pakistan, its neighbor, of, sending terrorists across the border, a charge that Islamabad has repeatedly denied. But all of this, New Delhi has been doing, experts say, to try and build consensus ahead of that leaders' summit in September.
Thanks. Neha Poonia, they're looking at this BRICS security meeting taking place in New Delhi.